Okay, let's stay on federal spending right now because that could be a huge communication challenge for the Carney government, scheduled to table its first budget on November the 4th. With more, let's bring in our party strategist, Marcy Sirks, former Liberal Executive Director of Policy and Cabinet Affairs in the PMO and current Chief Strategy Officer and Managing Director at Compass Rose, Cole Hogan, Conservative strategist, and in Peterborough right now, George Sewell, former NDP Director of Communications, current Principal at On Step Strategies. Hello to the three of you.
Hello.
Hello, Michael.
So listen, I want to talk a bit more about spending because there has been a lot of talk this week about the upcoming budget. On the one hand, Mark Carney's government investing in these national projects. On the other, we're hearing from people like the Parliamentary Budget Officer expressing concern that they don't really know whether or not this government is staying with its fiscal anchors. So I'm wondering, and Marcel, I'll get you to start us off here, how much of a challenge and will Canadians punish Mark Carney's government if he does not prove that he's a better fiscal manager than Justin Trudeau?
I don't think Canadians are going to punish Mark Carney anytime soon. While I think the honeymoon is over, so to speak, and that we're past that electoral bliss period, he continues to enjoy strong support across all of the public opinion research. And the reality is that Canadians are not set to go back to the polls anytime soon. So I do think Mr. Carney has some runway. He has presented himself as a strong economic steward, fiscal manager. It's true that this budget is going to be spendy. What I mean by that is clearly the investments that have already been outlined are massive, whether we're talking about the commitments to NATO defense spending, whether we're talking about major infrastructure projects or the domestic housing supply. Those are big ticket items for sure. I would encourage everyone to actually think about this budget, Mr. Carney's first, as an opening salvo, so to speak. It's almost like an amuse-bouche before we see the real budget in March. This is an off-cycle budget. It is part one of two. There will be significant investment. There'll be a bit of restraint demonstrated here. You're going to say, well, that's kind of how do you do both at the same time? How do you have restraint, austerity, and spending at once? I think this one will be heavier on spending and investment. We'll see more restraint in March. That's when I think the test, like the proof will be in the pudding in March. That will be when Canadians are really going to have to decide if Mr. Carney has gotten the country's finances under control.
Mm-hmm. What do you say that? Because, and for people who have forgotten, Mark Carney did campaign on being better fiscally than was the previous government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to continue the metaphor of the amuse-bouche, I'm interested to see what the main course is when the budget actually comes in. But I think there's a few things at play here. I think Mark Carney wants to continue to separate his government from Justin Trudeau's. Over the last few weeks, we've seen a shuffling of, a deck of cards of Trudeau-era ministers to bring in and put a new face on the Carney government. But this isn't new. It's a form of patronage. Every party does it. So I think it's pretty commonplace. But this is similar to what Justin Trudeau did when he first became Prime Minister as well. He didn't want the ghosts of Liberal eras past hanging over his governance. So as we watch things move forward, I'll be curious to see how that's done, because we still haven't had a budget in over 500 days. It's been a year and a half since we've had a budget, and we have no idea what the deficit's going to be. So I look at this overall, and we talk a lot about slogans, especially that's a criticism the Conservatives get. Spend less, invest more is also a slogan, and we'll see what it does to the country's finances.
Mm-hmm. George, I don't know if that makes you the dessert or the nightcap, but what do you say to it?
Well, I think ultimately people are more worried about what's going on their own kitchen table than any restaurant that would serve something called an amuse-bouche. And I think that's where Mark Carney's going to have a bit of a challenge, right? I think, being more responsible economically than Justin Trudeau is a pretty low bar set. Mr. Carney was elected to take care of Donald Trump. I think obviously that's become an even bigger challenge than he assumed it was. It was as tough as the rest of us knew, but he thought he could handle it, and that's being a bit too hard for him. So now he's trying to figure out things domestically. I think a budget that talks about austerity, which, let's be clear, that just means cuts. Those cuts, and he told us before the election, are going to come at services that people need. So I think, the honeymoon is still going. I think Marcy's cutting that a little short. I think it's still going on. But when those cuts hit people, I think that's when the real response and the real reaction to this prime ministership is going to come out, and then we'll see how people feel about that.
Well, you mentioned cuts, George, and I have to say, you look at the polling, and we were seeing this in the last few weeks, where the concerns, and this is not new to any of us around the table, but the concerns have shifted. They've shifted from Donald Trump back to affordability. Not that Donald Trump has gone away, but affordability is now once again on top. And if there is some demonstration of cuts, how hard is it going to be for this government to address affordability while at the same time retooling the economy and at the same time trying to deal with this first budget, Marcy?
Yeah, I mean, this government is trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. There's no question that there are multiple competing priorities, and sure, affordability never really went away. It was part of the second part of that conversation during the election around what Donald Trump meant for Canada, the impact on Canadian industry and the correlating effect on our kitchen tables and how each of us are feeling. So affordability is more pronounced now. That is in part because although the conversation has cooled with Donald Trump, the renegotiation of NAFTA, CUSMA, USMCA, whatever you want to call it, is just around the corner. And Canadians are going to start caring again quite a bit about what that conversation is with the U.S., even if it's not front of mind right now. Mr. Carney has to demonstrate that they get it on affordability. Mr. Poilievre has showed up. He is going to make sure that they don't forget what Canadians want to hear in terms of those affordability matters. But Mr. Carney, I think the toughest thing here is demonstrating their own restraint and spending and recognizing that you need the public service to deliver on all of these commitments. And so if we're talking program cuts and we are talking job cuts, the PBO is very clear. Attrition alone is not going to get to the numbers that the government needs to hit its own targets. That is going to mean job cuts in the public service. And for most Canadians outside of the National Capital Region, the question there is, what services, frontline or otherwise, will be impacted? And that, too, gets to questions around affordability and delivery of benefits that Canadians need. So, look, it's a complicated, complex situation. All of those issues are interrelated.
Yeah, and strategically, I kind of wonder how that works to the disadvantage of perhaps the government, perhaps to the advantage of the official opposition, because, of course, affordability is what the Conservatives were hoping that Canadians would actually vote on in the last campaign.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting and difficult conversation to be all things to all people in terms of Mark Carney's government and their first budget. I'll give them credit in terms of the major projects office. I think strategically, politically, that was a great thing. Not particularly impressed with the first 5 projects on the initial list. I hope that there's more to come, in particular, a pipeline project in Western Canada. I think that's something we need to see. And, I'll give the Liberals credit on another point in terms of their comms and strategy around Donald Trump and tariffs. In fact, it won them the last election, so full points on that. But now to the conversation we're having. The conversation has shifted where Trump and tariffs are no longer the #1 concern for Canadians. I think it was an Abacus poll that had, the majority of Canadians saying that there's too much focus on Donald Trump and tariffs right now. So as that issue, the #1 issue that the Liberals won the election on, as that fades from the forefront of minds for Canadians and domestic issues are more at the forefront where Conservatives are stronger, I think we have, a better advantage for setting the agenda in the fall sitting and the political battles to come.
Mm-hmm. George, how do you see affordability shifting what we see in the House of Commons?
Well, I think it's just a matter of people paying attention to what's happening, right? Again, there was the whole specter of Donald Trump. Which is what the Liberals were able to run on. We saw Pierre Poilievre trying to run on what was remaining in the tank on years worth of a campaign and millions of dollars spent attacking Justin Trudeau's Liberals, and then trying to get away with that even after Justin Trudeau was gone. And now it's time to actually talk about real people, right? And so, you say walk and chew gum. What the Liberals are really trying to do, literally, is say they're investing while they're actually cutting big. They want to say they're creating jobs while they're actually going to lay a bunch of people off. And I think that's, again, these things are going to hit their kitchen table and hit people in a real way. And, the Conservatives and Liberals can talk all they want about, being well-meaning, but ultimately people, I think, are saying, okay, how does politics affect me? It affects how I pay for things or how I'm not able to. And I think that's really what's going to hit people this fall and is already hitting. That's why it's come back on the top of the list, because sure, Donald Trump's scary, but what's scarier is not being able to put food on the table for your family and keep a roof over their head. So I think that's where the focus needs to shift to, and I think that's something that both Pierre Poilievre and Mr. Carney struggle with.
Okay, listen, George, you mentioned Pierre Poilievre. I'm running out of time. I have about a minute with each of you on this last question, but I do want to talk about Pierre Poilievre. Back in the House of Commons, but still, his popularity is less than the popularity of his party. I think like it's basically 2-1. People prefer Carney over Poilievre as Prime Minister. I'll begin with you here, Cole. Sure. What does Poilievre have to do to change his unpopularity numbers?
Well, I think there's a few things he can do. First and foremost, we've seen, a bit of the tone conversation is always first and foremost on this stuff, and I think we've seen some recent interviews from Pierre which have demonstrated that. But also
on the CBC.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, of all places. So in addition to that, it's been interesting because Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have said they're going to propose, not just oppose. I think that's a little bit different. The first day back in the House, Pierre Poilievre positioned a question in terms of in the spirit of nonpartisanship, and then questioning the Prime Minister from there. But over the last few years, Pierre Poilievre has defined the political policy issue matrix in Canada, and I think he'll continue to do that. And Mark Carney, in a lot of instances, has been following Poilievre's lead on policy. And right now, we see that Poilievre and the Conservatives are leading on all the domestic issues, immigration, crime, jobs, the economy. And as they continue to do that, that's something that Mark Carney and the Liberals will have to address and switch up their strategy for.
Okay, Marcy?
Yeah, I agree with Cole's assessment. I would say only this. I think Mr. Poilievre has begun to moderate his tone. He's clearly trying to appeal to a broader audience. He needs to do more of that. He is competing against a Prime Minister whose ace in the sleeve is his economic bona fides and his reputation in that space. We will see how he fares with Budget 1 and Budget 2. But assuming that Mr. Carney can maintain those economic credentials, Mr. Poilievre has to do whatever he can to shore it up, to show that he's got his own council of advisors, that he's got a path, that he can speak to both the macro and the microeconomic issues. He's good on the micro, we know that. He's got to be able to broaden it out to speak to a broader swath of Canadians.
Okay, last minute to you here, George.
Pierre Poilievre spent the last 10 years fine-tuning himself to be the ultimate Justin Trudeau fighter, and Justin Trudeau's gone. I think the Conservatives are going to have a leadership review coming up in a few months, and we'll talk, I'm sure, more about it between now and then. But I think Conservatives are looking around and saying, when you're a hammer, every problem's a nail. But now they need a screwdriver, and so that's just not a job that Pierre Poilievre can fill. So I think the Conservatives are going to be looking for an alternative soon.
Okay, well, you obviously never tell me how to build IKEA furniture, but so Marcy, Cole, George, thank you for that. Appreciate the time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.